Today, I want to talk about the collapse of the US dollar. And the reason why is because, well, it affects all of us a lot. But I think it's a very interesting look, and I think it kind of dovetails in with what went on at the World Economic Forum, where Canada and Mark Carney, more specifically, basically struck out against the United States and tried to overthrow the rules-based order. And I think there was a good reason for him to do so. He did retreat away from that position and has essentially come back with his tail in between his legs. However, I do think that may have started the ball rolling in a certain direction, which we will continue to see take more and more hold. And not specifically because of Mark Carney's comments, but more because of the US and what we have done, and just common sense. Because if anyone can see what Mark Carney saw, well, then you would probably want to flee the US as a partner in purchasing up our debt. And not specifically because of what Mark Carney said, but mostly because of the reasons why he said them. And I think that any country that looks at the base level fundamentals of where the United States is now and where it could possibly be headed in the future would probably come to the same conclusions that he did, whether they say it or not. And they may take actions that, quite frankly, I think they are, and would lead us to the collapse of the dollar. So I'm going to take a look at exactly what is happening, what that means for you, me, everyone in the United States, and where I think we're going from here. Hi there, pardon the interruption. I just wanted to make a real quick ask that if you are watching my content and you appreciate it, if you could please drop me a subscription. As you can see, through the life of my channel, 95% of the people that watch my content are not subscribed. So if you are watching and you find yourself enjoying the content, I would ask that you drop a subscription. Just, again, a really quick PSA, it would mean a lot to me. It really does help my channel grow, and it allows me to make this something that I can do for a living. So just wanted to take a real quick interruption, and I'll return you back to my video. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy.
All right, turning now to the economy, some major developments whenever it comes to the status of the U.S. dollar. We did see a very noteworthy clip here from Peter Schiff, who has been very prescient on major collapses. He was on Fox Business, dropping some truth bombs. Here's what he had to say.
And the world is now pulling the rug out from under the U.S. The dollar is going to collapse. The dollar is going to be replaced by gold. Central banks are buying gold to back up their currencies. True. They're getting rid of dollars. They're getting rid of treasuries. We are headed for an economic crisis, again, that will make the 2008 financial crisis look like a Sunday school picnic. The biggest difference between the crisis that we're about to have and the one we had back then is this one is all in America.
All right, so all of...
And I think that is 100% correct. And this is why in a lot of my recent videos, what I have said is that fiat currency and the Fed in general are just basically ruining the American economy. And they have been doing it for a long time. And that was why I made the points I did when I was talking about Mark Carney pulling and saying Canada is going to pull away from the US, is that exactly to this point, by having fiat currency that you can just print whenever you want, you devalue all of, basically, you, me, all of the average American's currency. I mean, literally everyone's currency, but once you reach a certain level, yeah, you have escape velocity because you have so much additional money set aside or invested or whatever that you don't really have to worry about this sort of a thing happening. Like, you're never actually in trouble, if you will. But with fiat currencies, and this is a huge thing that people have always decried about them, is that, yeah, if you can just go out and print whenever you want and you just continue to ramp up your spending like we have been doing in the United States for forever, decades now at this point, then at some point in time, every single other country is going to look at the American dollar and just say, these people are being totally irresponsible with the direction that they're going. And that's one thing that I constantly have been calling out, is that, yes, the second biggest expenditure on the books next year will be payments on our debt. So the interest payments on that. So just think about that. Number one will be Social Security, and number two will be payments on interest on our debt. And that is completely unsustainable. We need to get the budget down if we want to reverse this trend and have people actually have faith in the US economy and the US dollar. That needs to be completely reversed, and we need to be paying down our debt, because the logical conclusion of where we're headed, if I was another country, this is literally what I would think, is there's at some point in time in the future, which is probably not too far from now, the US is not going to be able to pay me back. And so it's literally just a Ponzi scheme, because at some point the US is going to be forced into saying, we're just not going to pay you back anymore because we can't afford to do so. And so if you're another country and you're buying up US debt, why would you continue to do so if you know that at some time in the near future, they're just going to completely say, hey, bankruptcy, we don't have to pay you anything back. Just wipe it all out. Good luck. Like, we're not paying you back. That it would be devastating to you, and especially, depending on how much of the US's debt you're holding. Yeah, it's literally just a Ponzi scheme where we're all just buying up each other's debt, and then again, at a certain point in time, the number gets too large and it becomes unmanageable, and you have to default. And that is 100% what I think we are racing to, because if we were not, they would have addressed some sort of, hey, we need to pull back spending and make it make sense. But that's not what happened. They just threw a bunch of gasoline on the fire and just continued to accelerate the spending to record levels this year. And so when you're seeing that literally is telling every other country, hey, we're racing towards defaulting right now, and we're just going to hit the go button as hard as we can, and we're going to run off the cliff. There is no other conclusion that any other country could come to. So just laying the groundwork, sorry to go on a little bit of a tirade at the front end here, but I want to lay out why this is such a concern for other countries and why they're starting to step back. So yes, I think he pegs out exactly what's happening. Peter Schiff does in his statement there. Obviously, he's on, CNBC, so he has a short little, here's his little sound clip, his sound bite that he wants to get out, and he can't lay all that out, but that's exactly what he would probably say if he were to lay out the entire case about why the dollar is plummeting and gold is surging, because all the US dollars are now moving into gold, because that's the only thing that can't be expanded on. Like, yes, more of it could be mined out of the ground, but it's a fairly rare mineral, and so it's not just gonna it's not gonna be inflated the same way that fiat currency currently is.
This is part and parcel, as we've said here in the past, of a major movement against the dollar. Now, I want to be very clear. Even when we say dollar crash, we're talking about like 0.61% or whatever drop. But what this generally can mean in a longer term trend, especially as we started here with global affairs, with war.
And yes, relative now. But again, I think over the longer period of time, as we continue ramping up our spending, like Trump saying that he wants to inflate the military budget from 1 trillion now up to 1.5. What? How are you going to increase that an additional $500 billion? That is just completely insane to me. And so, yes, when you're seeing those types of moves, it will only get worse the further we continue to ramp up spending like this. Because once again, the countries can see the writing that's on the wall, and if they are even halfway intelligent, they're going to pull back, because that does not spell out good things for them in the long term.
Wars with what's going on with Venezuela, the Greenland situation, some reporting that actually behind the scenes, the Danes and the EU had threatened the United States with massively selling off big portions of our debt, is instability of reserve currency and the simultaneous spike in gold could lead to some sort of event like this. Peter Schiff is effectively echoing a Ray Dalio thought, and I don't even really agree necessarily, but I do think it is important to air this type of perspective in the midst of all this golden insanity that I certainly don't fully understand. Let's go ahead and cue up Ray Dalio, who has been talking about this now for quite some time. A video that he put out just yesterday. Matt, can we take a listen?
It's the beginning of the end of the monetary system as we know it. It's not just the US dollar, it's the fiat monetary currencies. So the UK, the euro, Japan, China all have similar debt problems and so on, and are dealing with the same interrelationships, which is the reason you're seeing gold being chosen by the central banks. They want a currency. Gold has always been the main currency, and it's the only non-fiat currency, in other words, not the currency that can't be printed, that they want. And so that's why you're seeing central banks move and sovereign wealth funds move to gold, and that's the nature of the shift of the monetary system.
And that's exactly what I had laid out in the beginning, is because, you can't just come up with more of it. That was always the argument for Bitcoin as well, and why the Bitcoin bros were always so pro Bitcoin, and why it's by far the most popular cryptocurrency, is because the idea behind it is that there is only a limited supply of it, and there cannot be more created. And the value in that is, okay, there's only so much value. Now, obviously capital can flow into that and increase, when you're looking at, okay, how much is one Bitcoin worth versus dollars, and you see it go, down to 20,000 and then up over 100,000, and it fluctuates a lot. So there's, it is somewhat at the whims of how valuable other people think it is, but there's only a certain amount that's ever going to exist, assuming that whoever created it isn't actually able to gain access to it and create more of it. But that's essentially why it is valued so highly versus every other type of cryptocurrency, is because it is, no one can create any more of it. There's a set amount, and that is very appealing to people. Same thing again with gold. It's very hard to dig up more gold. Yes, it could be done, but it is a rare earth mineral, and so it's going to be challenging to really, just start printing it, especially the way that the US dollar and other fiat currencies, as laid out here, are able to do. And there's really, if you have paid any attention to any of these markets, there are a lot of ways that you could basically BS all these different currencies and do different exchanges and basically get free money, more or less. And so when you're taking advantage of these systems, again, to me, it just feels like a giant Ponzi scheme where it's just like, okay, printing more money out of nothing, and then, they get the money to create we as the US get more money to create weapons, and then, another country is just buying the debt, and then we're paying them with the interest rate. Because literally a Ponzi scheme, if you're not aware of how it actually works, that's all it was, okay, you give me your initial investment, I take that, and then I'm paying someone else's interest that they're accruing from their investment with your money, and then I go out and I spend your money. That is the definition of what is happening here. The US goes out, they are paying our weapons contractors to make weapons, and then we're giving them money off of the next round of debt that we're selling to another country. And that's just happening over and over and over again. And the same way that Ponzi schemes work in, just ask Bernie Madoff, or Sam Bankman-Fried was essentially doing this exact same thing. It doesn't work out well in the end, because eventually you run out of rope. And we've had a lot of rope as the United States to continue on with this trend. However, as I said, I think the rope is running out. And that's why I think really you've seen an insane acceleration, is to try and milk out as much as they can before it goes off that cliff. Because once it goes off the cliff, then people are going to, I think they will still work with us, because there is some amount of argument that, okay, yes, the United States has the largest military, and Might makes right. There's a reason why that saying exists. However, there are going to be a lot less countries that are going to want to work with us because of the fact that we've defaulted. We basically have told them, screw you, you're going to eat it. We're not paying you any more money. And they're going to do, at some point in time, there's going to have to be a hard reset. And then, it'll be a slow build up again, but then it's the same thing that's going to happen over and over unless some major corrective actions are going to happen. And so countries will have to weigh out what is the risk versus reward of that happening. How screwed do we get when the US does default? Can we just kind of, hey, okay, whatever, continue on and reset and still be generally okay? Yes, there will be some amount of pain that will be felt by everyone. But again, it's a risk reward thing. They have to weigh it. Each one has to do it individually. And there will be some countries that are going to say, yeah, okay, we're done. We're not touching this system again, because they will be more heavily impacted than other countries.
I mean, effectively what he's saying is about a flight from U.S. reserve status in the midst of global instability. So again, I don't fully buy a lot of gold bug arguments and gold standard stuff I think can go to kookery very, very quickly. But it is undeniable that this massive price spike in gold is not connected deeply to the actions of the Trump administration and of the United States, especially in the last, year or so under Donald Trump, the tariff regime, global instability, and it could be, about flight to it's what it really signals, and this is why I think he's talking about collapse. It's not just about currency, but about flight to safety away from U.S. assets. And what that broadly means is about lack of strength and faith in the overall U.S. economy, which of course is what all of our 401k, rely on, all of our retirement accounts, everybody's just general ability to buy and trade with foreign goods is going to make.
And I think that's a fair point as well. And the thing is with it is, yes, when you're looking at the stock market, that is a huge component of it, because everything else is falling off while AI still remains high. AI and gambling, those are, the two things that are now dragging it up. But I think there is, and I think this is probably part of it, is people are probably pulling back their money from the AI stocks, because you've seen those either level off or start to pull back now. Yes, people are probably pulling out money from there and shoving it into gold, because I think they are starting to question whether AI will actually meet the promises that it needs to fulfill in order to hit the valuations where the stocks currently are. And so, yes, I think it is a very complex system with a lot of reasons why. I think the more cogent argument for it is what I have laid out so far. However, a large component of it is, yes, I think there are a lot of people who have invested very heavily in AI who are now starting to pull back, and they go, okay, well, what else am I going to invest in? Because of the affordability crisis is still an issue. So then they're going to pour their money into, gold, because that's pretty much the only thing that seems to hold up when everything else is uncertain, because that's where people are pouring their money. And that's all it really is that I think everyone else is, hey, this is the only thing that we think is safe. So then that causes other people to then just follow in suit. I don't think it's necessarily the best thing, right? But it's something that seems to be the most stable, I guess I would call it. And so that's where they're going. There are other places you could put it, but again, it's monkey see, monkey do to a certain extent, where they say, okay, the smart money is moving there, so we're going to follow.
Exports, very different in terms of our relationship, manufacturing, inputs, all those types of things. So that's why I do think it is still interesting. We do have to, I like to pay attention to the Dalios and the Schiffs of the world, even though I don't necessarily 100% agree per se, but you can't look at the current movement in the gold market and say, it doesn't show something. It's definitely showing us something. And we're all just trying to figure out what that is.
Dalio has a theory of the cycles that societies go through that is worth engaging with as well. And in his view, we've now moved from phase 5 to phase 6, which is basically like imminent civil war and some sort of, mass turmoil. And, I think there are signs that we could be heading towards that. We'll talk more in the block about Minneapolis and what's going on there, the sort of face-saving moves that Trump is engaging in now to sort of step back from the brink. I think that's all very good. I'm glad to.
Yeah, and I agree with what she's saying here. I don't know that it is as imminent as it's made out to be. I think a lot of it is the news coverage is kind of ramped up to, and I think this is very bad. Let me just make that clear. But I think news coverage, it's these, one percenters that own these outlets, and you basically are just catering either far left or far right, and there's no real space in the middle for money to be made. And I can tell you just point blank from my channel, I basically piss off half of an audience no matter which take I make. And recently I had one where I broke down what's going on in Minnesota, and I just pissed off both sides. I still actually gained a fair amount for the size of my channel, followers from it, because I think it was, there were some people on either side who are not on the fringes who basically said, okay, this is a fair take, and I get what he's saying. But like the comments blew up, and it was basically people on both sides that were pissed off. So like trying to cater to the people in the middle, those are not, it's just, that's how I want my channel to be, because I think those are the people who are like the most common sense and like, hey, yeah, I might not agree with what you're saying, but I get where you're coming from, and I think you make some good points. Like, that's what I want my channel to be. That's why I cover the news in the way that I cover it. But yeah, the people who are at these stations, they're trying to make as much money as they can. And so it behooves them to basically go along with a party line in one way or the other, which automatically puts them at the far ends of the extremes of each camp. And then also, by the way, their owners may also have ideological, believe a certain way, right or left. And so it doubles down on that of, you need to cover it in one extreme or the other, and you can't break away from those. And so what that does is it further radicalizes people, especially people who are, I guess I'll say, mentally questionable, their grips on reality, and or just desiring to be in a camp. They don't do anything else all day. They sit around. They have anxiety because they don't get out energy, because they don't do anything physical. Again, I can go on an entire diatribe about this by itself, but these people basically buy into their cults on either side, and then those are the people who you see who go out to protests, who are, getting into scuffles with ICE, who are just all these sorts of things that you see where you go, oh my God, how is everything so broken? I don't think that's the majority of people in the United States, so that's why I have hope that we're not actually headed toward a civil war. However, those are, the worst 20% make up 80% of the coverage of the issues. And so, when you're seeing those people and you're seeing these things out there happening, it doesn't take a lot of people, it could be a few hundred people, to create these sensationalized headlines. And so that's why I like to call it out and say, hey, here's a common sense middle of the road take. And again, you don't have to agree with me, but hopefully we can all say, we need to take a step back. We need to try and talk people down from getting radicalized on one side or the other. Don't watch legacy traditional media, as I like to call it, because they're just pushing an agenda on left or right. Seek out people who are good faith, who are telling you what they believe, who are not trying to make money off of your fears and insecurities and basically create hyped up, radicalized rhetoric. And then just let's all try and get together, because the people who are fomenting that fear and fighting between left and right, they'll have some headline that comes out and then they'll screw you in the back door and basically do some sort of write-off that benefits themselves. That's what happens all the time. Like if you actually dig into what is going on when these things are happening, people are always the average American is getting screwed over every time something like this pops off. There's some sort of giveaway to the 1%ers. And so that's why I constantly will, people say something in the comments, and if they even seem somewhat like their head is, somewhat screwed on right, and but they say something slightly leaning what I view as too far right or left, I basically just say, hey, look, I reiterate that point of no, we need to all come together and turn the attention on what the actual issue is. So again, that's why I have hope that, it's just highlighting sensationalized stories with the most far, far left and right, and then it makes it look like the problem is much worse than it is. So I'm not certain that we've moved on to the 6th phase where there's an imminent civil war, but again, I think it's something that everyone needs to protect against, and the rhetoric does need to be toned down. And I think, as I have said in my Minnesota videos, Trump, to his credit, and Tom Homan, because Tom Homan was the person who was in charge of border security and border patrol and all these people during the Obama administration. So it's not like he's fully right wing. No, instead what he is he's him and Trump have both kind of, hey, I'm not going along with the insane things that Kristi Noem has said, and I think that's a good thing, and I think they realize that this is getting out of control, so they need to step in. And I think that, again, is something to their credit you have to call out, because it is a good thing that they're doing, but they're trying to tamp down the rhetoric that's going on here. And also Tim Walz going along with it, and the Minnesota police and all this sort of stuff where they're saying, okay, they have agreed that they need to work together. That's all a good thing.
See it because the temperature has been so incredibly high that, I've been quite worried about it spiraling out of control. Doesn't mean it's not going to spiral out of control, but at least maybe there's a step back from the brink right at this moment. My understanding of what this Trump administration is doing right now, and Trump himself and Scott Bessent and others have sort of indicated this, they've laid out their strategy, et cetera. Trump was asked about the decline of the dollar. And when the dollar declines, most of the things that we all buy at this point are imported from abroad. So if the dollar isn't buying as many goods abroad, that means everything's getting more expensive for you. That means whatever you've got in your savings account or whatever wages you're earning, they're not going as far, right? So for your average person who doesn't own a lot of assets, the dollar's decline it's really bad, right? It takes away your purchasing power. It makes you poorer. If you are a very wealthy person who is an asset owner, it actually can be beneficial. It also is beneficial.
And just really quick, what I'll say to that is similar to my stance on tariffs. If you have been following tariffs at all, basically 80% of the cost of tariffs have been eaten by the companies. Because, and my theory for this is that because of all the greedflation that they got away with under COVID/Biden, and they just, hey, we're getting away with raising our prices, blaming supply chains, whether that was the fact of why they were increasing prices or not. And in most cases, it wasn't. It was because the companies were just greedy and they saw that they could get away with charging more. Because they ramped up their prices so high during that period of time, they could incur the costs of tariffs. I think very similarly, the same thing is going to happen now. Because, and the reason why I say this, is there will be some, if there is an instance where, hey, we actually do have to increase our prices because these things are, we have already brought down our prices. And I think the best example of this is if you look at the grocery store, right? I don't know if you pay attention to prices. I typically don't that much, but the grocery store that I shop at, they do put, hey, this is a price reduction. And you see, okay, this is what the price was, and this is what it is now. And prices have been overall, as I have noticed, coming down. And the reason why is because it isn't sustainable for them to charge a higher price. So although this may be the although what she may be saying, some subset of it may be accurate where some of the prices may go up. I don't think that there's actually that much room because of the affordability crisis that is going on everywhere. I'm not certain that companies will actually be able to increase their prices all that much. I think what's going to happen is there's going to have to be some sort of reset where these companies just go, hey, we literally cannot increase our prices because the cost of everything else is so high that we have to keep them where they are, and it just has to eat into our profits. And these companies are still going to be, for the most part, massively profitable because they have been for forever. And so, yeah, it's just they're going to have to bite the bullet, and they're just going to have to make less money on the whole, which makes sense, right? Because you can't, if people are going to stop purchasing your product, if you increase the price of it and find alternatives, well, then that's just going to be what is going to happen to you. And the best thing about that is these companies, I think, are only going to put up with that for so long. And then they are going to have to go in and lobby the government or however they see that they need to do this, that something needs to be done about all these other places. And this is where I constantly talk about non-negotiable costs. They're going to have to go in and we need to reduce those costs because literally we are not making any money and we're going to go out of business. Like food companies, like clothing companies, like anything that is discretionary or even less discretionary, because I think food is less discretionary. And so when you're seeing, agricultural companies or, distributors or whatever that are saying we're seeing a huge problem here where people are not able to afford food, or, clothing companies, we're seeing people pull back money from this, or larger items like toys viewed as like boats or off-road vehicles or any of these sorts of things where people are just not going to be able to afford them anymore. There's tons of products that can be viewed as this, electronics, I could go on and on. But the thing is, those companies there's gonna be a point in time where people are just having to do without, like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to get the newest iPhone, or I'm not gonna be able, whatever. Those companies are gonna get mad, and then they're gonna say, hey, we need to push back on housing, we need to push back on healthcare, we need to push back on, there's a ton of other things where, yeah, they're going to have to say, hey, we can't afford to do this anymore. You, the government, need to step in and regulate private equity or insurance or whatever it is, all these sorts of things. You're going to need to go in and regulate all of these companies, and because we need to have some sort of equilibrium that makes sense for everyone. This is not sustainable anymore. And I think that is going to be coming, especially in the instance that she laid out, where they just can't increase, that I laid out on the example that she used, where these companies just can't increase prices anymore because the average American is squeezed way too hard. So I think she's somewhat correct, although I think she's leaving out, because these people, right, Crystal and Sagar, they make a lot of money. Like, they're millionaires, don't cry for them, right? They are somewhat detached of like what the actual struggle is on the ground. And so, yes, that is why I'm giving more of an example from an average viewpoint. I think I actually go to the store. I actually interact with what is going on. I look at prices. I may not pay that much attention to them, but I still know generally what the trend is for an average person. And so when you're seeing that, yeah, that's why I think I can provide a little bit more of a nuanced and holistic perspective of what is actually going on. And that's why I think my take is probably a little bit closer as to what is the trend, where is it going, and what do I think is actually going to occur from what is going on in this sector and in these markets.
This is part of their part of why they're moving in this direction, I think, intentionally, it also is beneficial in terms of making your exports more competitive. So if you do want to rebuild, the manufacturing base, and this is something you're prioritizing, this would be something that you would do. And so for people who own...
And that is extremely important. That is the one thing that when I talk about China versus the US, and especially I love to use the example, but if you're talking about vehicles, right? Yeah, the reason that we are even competitive in exporting vehicles is because we force all of our allies to basically, you're not allowed to purchase Chinese vehicles. And that is the biggest thing, is that, yeah, we tell them, no, we hold our currency over them, we hold our military aid over them, we hold, hey, look, we're going to boot you out, we're not going to protect you anymore. And that is why I go back to the statements made at the World Economic Forum, and why I bring them up, is that, yeah, if all those other countries basically said, screw you, United States, we don't care anymore, we're going to buy from China, that is why our goods are not competitive with theirs. And it's not a problem when China is, oh yeah, they have inferior goods, at least to the things that the US is trying to export. And why I use vehicles is very easy to see. Oh, the US is exporting Teslas, if we're talking about just electronic vehicles. And yes, it is a good product, but now China has surpassed in quality what Tesla does. And they have either batteries with longer ranges on them so you can drive further, or it charges significantly faster, or it's a nicer luxury vehicle, or it's whatever it is. And by the way, it costs significantly less. We're talking like $10,000, $20,000 less than the Teslas. How is that competitive in a global market? And that's what I have always been concerned about with the dollar being so inflated, is that, okay, if the markets were truly free, the US would be basically standing holding the bag, because no one would want any US good if China can offer a better good for less money. That just doesn't make sense. And so that is why I argue that the dollar needs to be deflated. Yes, it will basically destroy finance markets, right? But I think that's a good thing. That needs to happen. I think finance, basically us having the entire US market stood up on finance, is stupid. I think it's an awful thing to stand up your country on, because it produces nothing of value. And in the long term, yes, we are also selling out our military protection to get companies to, okay, we'll buy your vehicles and we will not bring in any Chinese vehicles. And, it does fuel our economy to a certain extent. So it's a very complex ecosystem. But just logically, if every other country that we are allies with decided to, hey, we're going to group up, and now that China's military is the second most powerful or whatever, however you want to, if there's some sort of reshuffling that occurs, because then they go, okay, well, the Chinese is the second, and if they are ever comparable to the US, well, then we can go to them, and then we can add our military into theirs, and then we also get the benefit of their cheap goods, which are actually better than the United States goods. And there are a lot of bad things that are incentivized with financialization basically being everything that the US economy is propped up on. We're not innovating anymore. We're not creating the best products anymore. It just makes it more prime that the US gets overthrown as the number one country in the world. And it is a very concerning trend to be watching this happening, and rightfully so, by devaluing our currency and making our goods actually competitive in the space again, and lighting a fire under the United States to, hey, you have to innovate again. You have to come up with better products, because your company isn't being propped up on, well, the US, everyone has to basically go along with what the United States tells them to do. And so they're buying your inferior products for more money. And that's the space that we find ourselves in. So there's a lot of good that I think and importance in devaluing the US currency. So yes, I think it is concerning when you see the money flocking to gold, but the more that devalues our currency, the better I think it is holistically for the United States.
On those capital producing assets, it also is beneficial. The other reason to do this is because we have a massive amount of debt. So if you make the dollar value, like those dollars, worth less, then it is easier to pay off that debt. And that has also been, something that has been, this is a tactic that's been deployed over any number of years now.
Chinese currency manipulation is very common.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is important as well. However, once again, that kind of is a concern because it could go into essentially a death spiral where it's like, oh yeah, you're printing more money to pay it off, and then it's just a downward spiral. So yes, it is possible, although with the amount of debt that we have, and it would once again send more uncertainty into the market because they're just continuing to devalue their currency, and it just becomes worse and worse and worse. So it is possible, but it's not because of our currency being the reserve currency for now. There are some additional considerations that would not make it as possible as China has done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that is what is going on. So, when Trump comes out and he gets asked about the dollar's decline and he's like, I'm happy with it. Like, I'm happy with where the dollar is. I think you should take his word for it, that is actually their plan. And you need to understand what that means for you, for what's in your savings account, for what's in your, ability to purchase. And that is a plan directly to make you poorer so that's one piece.
And that is a very important thing, just that I do want to say something on, right? Put your money wherever you want, but try to pool as much of it as possible, because I think there is going to be a large safety net that you should have, so that if you are affected by AI, anything that happens, it could be a very troubling reality that you are facing in the next year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever. And so if I can give any advice to anyone that watches this channel, it is anything that you can do, forego any large expenditures, at least until things start turning around, and put away as much money as you can. Whether you decide to store it in gold, whether you decide to just put it in a savings account and hold on to it, whether you stuff it into your mattress, whatever it is that you decide to do with your money, I'm not going to tell you what to do with it. But what I will say is try and put it somewhere where you have access to it, where it's not going to be influenced by the stock market. I think is probably a very concerning place to have it. Like I said, just try to make it so that you have money on hand that's easily accessible, that will give you, in the best circumstances, years of oh shit money, if I can call it that, right? Where you can say, I have access to money where if everything goes sideways, I will be okay for at least a fair amount of time. Because I think that, yes, things are very uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And again, if I can express any sort of, it may be hard, it may require a tightening of the belt, but you should have a fairly large amount of rainy day money set aside for exactly this, this thing, whatever it is that's happening, to withstand any sort of economic downturn. And I think right now is a very good time to do it. Even if you never use it, right, you'll have it on hand for later, but again, this is the number one piece of advice that I cannot stress enough, is have money set aside just in case. Like, you need a sizable, in my opinion, again, rainy day fund, I'll call it, that you should have set aside.
The other piece is this question of selling American, right? Not purchasing American, not buying American bonds, offloading treasury bonds, not holding as much in terms of dollar reserves. Central banks have reduced their amount of dollar reserves. that is a separate piece, which really reflects the sort of, the shrinking power of the U.S., the fact that a lot of countries are very unhappy with us and the way we run the global financial system, the increasing realization that we are not in the unipolar moment anymore, countries wanting to protect themselves from, our ability to completely manipulate their financial system. And the part of Peter Schiff's analysis there that I'm skeptical of is I don't know that it happens in this big collapse all at once, but you can see this sort of slow and steady erosion moving in a direction away from the U.S. being the central player the one and only central player in the global financial system.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of where I am and that's why I go back to my statement of, yes, it's not going to happen all at once because might makes right. And I will go back to that statement because, yes, if you are the guarantor of half of the world's security and you have the largest military and you carry the biggest stick, there's a certain amount of, hey, fall in line. And as I have said before, and again, I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, but if we have weapons that we have not, we're playing poker and we haven't shown our hand, but our allies may know, hey, the U.S. has the biggest guns. They have these UAP, these crafts. Like, if any of these are ours and we're showing we have sound-based weapons that no one else has, we haven't seen on the global stage yet, what else do you think we have? In that instance, then, of course, there's going to be some set of, this is just status quo. We're going to continue to have to, whether we agree with the U.S. or not, we may pull back, but we're not going to do a complete exit from the U.S. because then that might turn their ire and their military might on us. So I think that is a good point that she makes, and especially if you agree with me on that, hey, yes, the U.S. has, again, they're playing their cards close to their vest. They're not laying down all their cards on the table. They have aces up their sleeves. If you believe any of those sorts of things in regards to our military, then yeah, you're not going to see a full pullback because people are still going to want to side with whoever is the strongest. So again, that's not saying it's right. That's not saying that is 100% correct, but that is where my mind is and why I don't think that it's going to be a sudden fall off a cliff, why I don't think we're moving into the sixth stage with civil war. And that's just kind of where I am on that viewpoint. So that's why I do agree with what she's saying there, where I don't think it's going to fall off a cliff, but it is just things to think about and things to monitor. And that's why I am where I am with that stance.
And by the way, as we speak, gold is currently at 5,500 per ounce. It's insane. I mean, not only not sitting like this, but everyone's calling it safe haven. And yeah, you're right. I mean, this is again why I also look, the gold bugs, many of them are also invested. And that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical sometimes of their analysis, but they have good critiques of the global financial system. And I think one of the things that you're pointing to is if we look at the way that empires kind of fade away, is that this is kind of sometimes can be canary in the coal mine. Usually what happens is a great war. Unfortunately, what we just talked about was a war with Iran, so who knows? It could be certainly something. So you see instability, then you have an outbreak of a great war, and immediately afterwards, usually what happens is you don't immediately acknowledge. You're like, oh, well, we're no longer an empire. But you slowly, within the next decade, find yourself no longer, let's say, the pound sterling, no longer as powerful as it once was, and you watch your empire kind of fade from 1919 all the way up until the 1960s. That's usually what the story can look like. Let's say the Roman Empire, or any of these others, if you study this. But internally also, a key part of strength is not just how you trade abroad, but what happens to you at home. So yesterday we talked, 2 days ago, we talked about the long-term unemployment rate. We also have this AI data spending that's all been happening. We haven't covered it in quite some time, but it is still like a massive monolith of all of our GDP per capita spend. And we're also beginning to see the effects of this in the white-collar marketplace. So can we put B4, please, up on the screen? This is a massively influential story. Amazon is set to axe another 16,000 corporate jobs. The cuts will bring the total number of layoffs to 30,000 over the last 3 months and a higher spending on AI. And they said organization changes, reducing layers, removing bureaucracy. Most U.S.-based employees would be given 90 days to look for a new role internally or offered severance pay. And the cuts basically from 30,000 all appears to be part of the AI and how it would reduce the Amazon headcount, which they previewed last year in their investor letter. And this is, the second.
And the thing is with that is, yeah, all those people are gone. Like they say it's I have seen it happen where they go, oh yeah, exactly what he just said about it, where they basically lay it out as, oh yeah, we're going to give them 90 days to find another position in Amazon. Those positions don't exist. Like there may be a few hundred that get saved, but the majority of those 16, especially since they already did cuts, and now it totals, it was 14 before and 16 now, so 30 total. Those are all gone pretty much. Like don't fool yourself into thinking any great amount of those people are going to be saved. So it is very concerning when you're seeing that happen, that they are, doubling down into it again, especially so quickly after they just cut. And so that means that they cut, they didn't see anything happen. So then they go, oh yeah, we can cut again. And that's quite frankly very concerning. And that's why I said just recently, set some rainy day money aside, because if they continue in this trend and they see that there's no problems with it happening, like there's no actual impacts to their business, and they're just continuing to, go along business as usual, or it's actually a boon to them and they're making more money, just very concerning. And that's why I say there's so much uncertainty that you need to have some rainy day fund set aside, because I think they, especially with anyone who's building out as many data centers as Amazon is, they know what is on the bleeding edge. They know, okay, if we can roll out the cutting edge out there, and if you've interacted with them, and as I have said in marketing, I would replace my entire team if I was leading a team again. I would essentially replace them all with AI, save for, maybe one or two employees beneath me. And I'm speaking as a marketing leader. And I will give the caveat that marketing is probably one of the most easily disrupted, because if you can write a good prompt, you can basically replace the entire productivity of someone in a week's worth of work within a couple of minutes. So that is kind of an outlier, I think, in the field. But if you can even extrapolate that amount of productivity and put it in the hands of any other department, you just can't, it can't be ignored. And it's going to be utilized, especially by the most tech-forward companies. So just a very interesting thing to keep an eye on, and very concerning. And so that's why I say have your rainy day money set aside, because you probably will need it at some point in time. And there's a lot of factors out there. It's not just the monetary system and what's going on there, but also that's why I mentioned AI when I said that as well, because there's a lot of variables that could impact you in a very big way. And I will also call out even robotics. And that's why I say I don't even think the blue collar jobs are particularly safe, because Elon, if you have not seen, Elon is cutting back manufacturing on Model S and Model X. He's no longer going to be continuing them, and it's going to be all shifted into robotics and creating robots for people. So he's going hard in that direction. I think he has a very good business sense, regardless of what you think of him in general. He has a lot of companies that have done extremely well. And I think this is, if you're trying to read where things are going, I don't think blue collar jobs are even as safe as you may think they are.
Round that we've seen already. If you total it up back to 2023, it's like tens of thousands actually that have been laid off from Amazon. So I think it's really, really important for people to pay attention, in these white collar tech more focused workplaces, because that can be a precursor to what's happening to you. And so if we have high unemployment, then we're going to be thinking also about our own domestic federal interest rate policy and how that interacts with the globe. Like this is where chaos. I'm not saying it's the Great Depression, but you can see why the Great Depression was so massively influential, where we had to balance not only what was happening here, but with the global system itself, and how that unleashed, an insane war in the Second World War.
Let's go ahead and put B3 up, because I actually think this relates to the Trump account block that we're about to do here. So I really had to sit with this one for a while to figure out whether this was any meaningful in any way. But basically, people have been sharing this chart. And this isn't like, a new invention that people use, but people track the stock market not only valued in US dollars, but also, compared to the value of gold. And so this person says, if you measure the stock market in gold instead of in dollars, the US stock market has basically collapsed. No.
And just to her trying to figure out if this matters or not, it does matter a lot, because the issue, and I'm actually glad that they bring up this chart, because I saw it independently of this and I was like, man, I really hope that this gets brought up and I can cover it, because if you look at this graph, what it's basically telling you is that it's pegging the dollar to, where's some sort of currency that everyone recognizes as valuable. And you can try and, all the other currencies are kind of moving up and down. And so it can be kind of hard to get a good sense of, what does the U.S., what does it look like, the U.S. dollars in the stock market, and what does it look like in comparison to a global currency, if you will? Like how are we generally doing versus, and it could be sentiment as well, right? It doesn't have to be exactly a one-for-one currency. In this case, because it's gold, it kind of is. And I think gold is the most important one, because it's not just the US putting money into gold, but it is globally, hey, we're trying to flee all of, if all the fiat currencies are being compressed, then what is that saying, right? How do we actually get an accurate picture? And I think this is the most valuable accurate picture, if you will, is reflected in this graph, because what you're saying is, where all of the money globally is going is into gold. So how do you measure the US performance, just GDP, stock market, all these things, versus where all the money is being put into? And when you look at this, it tells a very concerning picture that, yes, the U.S. stock market may be at all-time highs or near it, or, now it seems to be kind of depressing a little bit, because probably all that money is flying into gold. And when you're seeing that, this tells a very concerning picture. And I think that is what you need to be paying attention to, is because it goes, what is the globally recognized safe money, and how does that track versus what your economy is doing? And so this is, I think, the most important graph in this entire video, and this is the one that you need to pay attention to. And so when you're saying compared to gold, the S&P 500 is what they're tracking here, but when you're looking at, yes, the numbers may be high because of AI artificially inflating it, but when you're tracking it in comparison to gold, it's telling you it's a very concerning picture. And that's what you need to be paying attention to. And that's why I think this whole gold story is so important, because it tells you, hey, how is your economy actually doing? How is your stock market actually doing? How concerning is this? And you can see, if you look at the points on the graph for each of these, you have Lehman, which really tanked, it was tanking down before Lehman. So that was a sign that, there's an issue coming in here. There was the US dollar downgrade, which is way down. So this was an issue. COVID-19, obviously that was an issue. So when you're seeing it now, it tanked down on, right before Liberation Day. and now it's tanking down again. It's telling you, and just again, if you're looking at it from what are the trends, what is happening, something big might be happening again. And yes, there were a few times where it tanked down and not necessarily something happened, but again, if you're trying to peg trends to where are the worst things that have happened in the past and how was the money moving beforehand in comparison to gold, that's what this graph is telling us, is that something big could be on the horizon. And so you're seeing the market move before that news is given to us. But then also, once again, you're seeing it relatively, if you're trying to do apples to apples, it is worse than the markets were in COVID-19. And so it's an issue. There's a big issue happening. And so, again, that is why I said earlier, pay attention, put money aside. You need to be able to weather a storm, because there is a storm brewing, in my opinion, that is of equal concern as to 2008, 2009. Again, you're seeing the exact same fall off. 2008, 2009, you're seeing the same thing. We're in as bad of a position as we were then. Again, comparing where we are financially with the stock market in comparison to gold, which is, again, it's a global monetary market, right? It's a currency that is recognized and globally important. And so, again, measuring our dollars to that, or the stock market to that, is very, very concerning. So once again, have a rainy day fund, put as much into it as you possibly can, so that if anything bad happens, you can hopefully weather the storm.
I mean, this makes logical sense when you consider how much gold has gone up in price. It has vastly exceeded the, returns, the increase in returns on the stock market. So that's the relationship that is being tracked here. And what this points to is that, in a sense, some of the stock market gains are a bit of an illusion, because if the dollars are worth less and you're valuing it in dollars, then it stands to reason that, your store of value is not staying at the same level. So that's what this chart is trying to establish. And like I said, this will kind of shift us into this Trump account thing, because what this...
And that's exactly what I have been saying, is that, yeah, when you're that, and so what she said, but then also it exposes that AI bubble where you go, oh yeah, okay, the money is not really what it is. It's artificially inflated, and there's a lot of speculation in the actual fundamentals. Everything else is falling off. And so when you're seeing that, and there's flight to other markets because of that. And so, yes, when you're seeing that, it's calling all of those things out.
Administration has said is, first of all, they're very interested in stock market performance. It's the one thing that really causes Trump to, I think it's a reason he backed down from his Greenland threats, because he saw the market reacting and he didn't like that and whatever. And they really talk about, as we move into this AI era,
or the Greenland thing was just calculated in general. How many times has Trump said one thing that was way above, like basically out of bounds, more or less viewed out of bounds, way above, and then, okay, I got what I wanted, right? I mean, just literally read his book, Art of the Deal. That's essentially what he basically lays out, is you go way aggressive, and then it comes in and you get actually what you wanted all along anyway. That TLDR, if you never read Art of the Deal, that's basically what he says. So it may have been in the cards anyway, but it could also have been, she could be correct, but I kind of think a lot of it was just rhetoric to try and get what we wanted, which was, okay, we have a permanent presence here for basically forever. And that is basically what ended up happening. So, yeah, some of it might have been just bluster and not realistic to begin with. So that might be a little bit overstated.
Rather than having more progressive taxation, rather than having public ownership of the AI technology, rather than having some sort of universal basic income, their view is, well, why don't we just get everybody more invested in the stock market? And so then when Nvidia goes up, you guys, you commoners out there, will sort of, get the second order gains from whatever your holdings are in the stock market. That seems to be their view of how to handle the shift to the AI economy, where the idea is that you are going to be out of a job and, you're going to have an even greater consolidation of wealth and power in the hands of a few. We're already starting to see in some isolated instances, like what we just covered with Amazon, that job loss. We're seeing an impact, on college grads right now. And so that is the direction that they think they should push things in. And I think that is the sort of genesis of the idea of these Trump accounts and these investments for babies, which are being piloted now.
Yeah, I think an important component of that as well to think about is I don't think it's a particularly strong one just because it's investing for children. I think it is better than what they have now, which is nothing. So, hey, take the free money. But it's not, the problem with it is that it's not really solving the major problem that AI is going to present if it does meet the promises that, I believe that it is going in that where a lot of people are going to be displaced from jobs, but it doesn't fully solve that problem, but it moves in the right direction. And I think shifts the Overton window of we need to provide some sort of, program for people so that they can get some sort of UBI. And so it is a step in the right direction, especially for leadership that is Republican and has been against that sort of a thing. They, traditionally they have said no free handouts, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but the thinking around AI needs to be reframed, in my opinion. So when we're talking about these child investment accounts, it is a step in the right direction, and it is something that needs to be considered and does shift the Overton window to we need to provide some sort of programs for people to protect them against AI displacement. Again, that is something that I think is more long-term and needs to happen, but is something that is very important. And the more that they talk about it now, I think is more important for the future because I think it is coming very soon. And it is something that needs to be discussed before everyone gets displaced and people end up out on the streets through no fault of their own. So just a very interesting video. I think it is something that is very important to talk about because I think it has very vast implications. Once again, as I said, you need to have some sort of rainy day fund. You need to be putting aside as much money as possible because I think there is going to be a lag between when people are massively displaced and when the government actually figures something out and comes through with some sort of solution for average Americans. And so you need to be able to weather that storm. You need to have some sort of something you can fall back on and have money set aside so that you are not extremely impacted by what is going on in the market. But if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.